say it all the time. Leadership is hard. Management, supervision, influencing people, daring them to do great things. It's really hard. But you know, sometimes we make it harder than it needs to be. Let's talk about that for a hot minute here. You and I can actually, by virtue of our strengths as leaders, managers, and supervisors, make our work harder than it needs to be, not only for us, but the people that we lead. We do that because we think that this is so important that it should be hard. We think that it's so complicated or complex, so of course it should be hard. We think it involves a lot of people and they're a bunch of galloping weirdos, so of course it should be hard. We had a really fun time with a bunch of our friends in a big class that we were doing a few weeks back, and one of the guys showed up in the class who we'd never met before. We'd met a lot of them, but not this guy. He's a manager, a supervisor of some level. I forget what level he is in this large, complex organization. And he came in, he has a little bit of a severe expression on his face, wearing a black baseball cap with a gray embroider on it that just said, "I hate people." And it made me laugh. So I walked up to him and I thought, okay, what's this guy like? And I said, "I love your hat." He's got this warm, delightful, friendly personality. He just had a little bit of an RBF when he first came in, and you know what that means, right? But he lit right up, just a delightful guy. And he said he wears the hat because he likes to have people interact with him. And he said, it's not like I hate individuals, it's just the idea of people. We thought that was great. But maybe you have a bunch of difficult people that are in your enterprise and in your work, or you've got one difficult person that makes everyone else feel even more difficult because of the effect. So you think it involves people like that, so of course it's supposed to be hard. Maybe you think, no one around me has done this thing we're trying to do well. So that must mean the reason they haven't done it well is because it's hard. Maybe, just between you and I, you think, you know, I get paid pretty well, so maybe it should be hard because it's kind of easy for me, but maybe it should be hard because that's just how important and how well compensated this actually work is. Let me remind you that yes, leadership, management, and supervision is hard, but you and I, often make it harder than it needs to be. This is just a quick pause for you to begin to ask yourself that question. Have I done that? Am I making it harder than it needs to be? Well, when do you ask that question? Ask it when it is harder than you thought it was going to be. Ask that question when it's taking longer than you thought it should take, when it costs more than you thought it should cost, when there's more resistance, there's more pushback, there's more frustration from other people than you expected. It was a great idea. Well, why is it so hard? When you've hired somebody and brought them into the fold and all that process was really good, but after being there a month, now everything with them and around them is harder than it needs to be, harder than you expected. Ask yourself there, am I making this harder than it needs to be? Ask yourself, do I only get reward and satisfaction and enjoyment out of my work when it is absolutely perfect? Which means you never get enjoyment, reward out of your work. Ask yourself, is my deep-seated, obsessive, compulsive, perfectionistic, twit-like nature making it harder than it needs to be? You do know that if you get something to about 95% of what it ought to be, it takes a certain amount of time, energy, effort, money, etc., engagement. But to get it from 95% to this elusive 100% takes about the same amount of time, energy, money, effort, engagement as it took to get from 0 to 95. Wow, it's amazing. Think about it that way. So maybe your perfectionistic nature is making it harder than it needs to be. How do you know if that's the case? Well, when something is perfect, in those rare cases that it is perfect, can you actually celebrate that? Can you enjoy when something is really good? Or do you sit back and think, yeah, well, it could have been, and you have that kind of nasal approach to life? Maybe you're making it harder than it needs to be because you have some obsessive, elusive image about what perfection actually means. The word perfect, the way I like to think about it, by the way, is more of a Greek image of perfect than a Latin image of perfect. The Latin concept of perfect is attained to some high standard. But the Greek image of perfect is the concept that it has all of the parts. It has everything it needs. That's what I mean by perfect. It means complete. It doesn't mean stretching to attain some elusive standard. So ask yourself, am I making this harder than it needs to be? At moments when there's more resistance than you thought there would be. At moments when there's less joy in your work than you thought it would be. Go first to that question. Am I making it harder than it needs to be? Because maybe the reason it's so hard is because you're making it harder than it needs to be. Just between you and me, there's nobody else. You're not in a crowd listening to this. It's just you and me. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're making it harder than it needs to be. You know what? You can also use this idea with other people. You're surrounded by people who are frustrated from time to time in their work. How about if you learn to ask them this same question, graciously, not judgmentally, not critically? Is there anything you're doing that's making this work harder than it needs to be? And then zoom out a little bit. Is there anything we as a team are doing that's making the work harder than it needs to be? You may find that there are some expectations, there are some policies, some procedures, some use of tools, some scheduling, something like that that used to work, but now it's just super hard to do it. Maybe you could just wave your leadership wand and say, we don't need to do that anymore. Therefore, it's now not harder than it needs to be. You know, and to wrap up this simple conversation with you, some things are hard, and you can't make them less hard, but doesn't mean we have to accept that everything that's hard is supposed to be hard, right? Sometimes it's just you and I making things harder than they need to be. Give yourself a break. Give yourself a break. It was Thomas Jefferson who said way back in the day, remember to always grab things by the smooth handle. I think he's trying to say there that there's a hard way of doing something and an easy way of doing something. There's a super difficult and challenging way, and then there's a less challenging way. If you're going to pick up a piano, find the smooth edges to pick it up. You still have to pick it up. You know, if you're going to do some work, you know, find a tool that has a smooth handle to it. Don't just beat your head against the wall. Don't always look for the easiest way, but don't look for the hard way either. Stop and think, am I making this harder than it needs to be? Said it for years, still say it to myself, still say it to our team. Leadership is hard, it's challenging, but let's not make it harder than it needs to be. Here's to you. Keep up the good work. See you next time.